They called her Hollow, a wolf born without a wolf. And in the world of shifters, there was no greater shame than walking through life with silence where your beast should be. Seren Vale had learned to make herself invisible, to keep her head down in the Dusk Hollow pack, to endure the mockery, the pity, the quiet cruelty of wolves who saw her as less than nothing. Her own father couldn't look at her without disgust. Her sister pretended they weren't related. The pack tolerated her only because killing a hollow brought bad luck, an old superstition that was the only thing keeping her alive. So when the rogue burst from the tree line, massive and feral and hungry for blood, and the only thing between it and the abandoned cub was Seren, no one expected her to move. But she did. She threw herself between death and innocence with nothing but her bare hands and a desperate scream. No claws, no fangs, no wolf rising to protect her. Just a hollow girl facing a monster alone. And the Alpha King of Ithran watched the entire thing without moving a single muscle. Calyx Thorn, the most powerful alpha in 5 kingdoms. The Cold King, they called him, because his eyes held all the warmth of a frozen grave. He stood at the edge of the clearing with his royal guard, close enough to hear her bones break, and he did nothing. Not until it was over. Not until Seren lay bleeding in the dirt, the rogue dead by her hand through means no one could explain, and the cub crying against her chest. Only then did he speak. "Bring her to me." Seren didn't understand why a king would want something as broken as her. She didn't understand the terms he offered. Protection, position, a place at his side. In exchange for a secret he refused to explain. She only understood one thing. He'd watched her almost die and hadn't flinched. And somewhere beneath his silence, beneath the frost that seemed to live in his bones, Seren would discover a truth that would change everything. About him, about herself, and about the ancient power sleeping in her blood. Neither of them was ready for what that truth would cost. The morning had started like every other morning in Seren's life, with humiliation. "Hollow's still breathing," someone muttered as she crossed the courtyard toward the well. Pity. She kept her eyes forward, kept her spine straight even though everything in her wanted to curl inward and disappear. The laughter followed her like a shadow, always present, always waiting. 23 years of this. 23 years of being the packless wolf, the empty vessel, the embarrassment her father couldn't drown at birth because tradition forbade it. Hollows were rare. Hollows were omens. Hollows were kept alive and treated like ghosts. Present but never acknowledged. Breathing but never truly living. Seren pulled the bucket from the well and started back toward the servants' quarters, where she'd been assigned to sleep since her 15th birthday. Not the family home. Not anymore. Her father, Aldrich Vial, was beta of the Dusk Hollow pack. Having a hollow daughter had nearly cost him everything, so he'd made her disappear in the only way tradition allowed, by erasing her from his household while keeping her technically alive. "Careful, Hollow." A foot shot out. Seren stumbled, water sloshing over her worn dress. "Wouldn't want you to fall and break something important. Oh, wait." The wolf grinned, showing too many teeth. "There's nothing important in there to break." More laughter. Always more laughter. She said nothing, collected herself, kept walking. The water was for the Alpha's visiting guests, some dignitary from the High Kingdom of Ithran, here to discuss borders or treaties or whatever Alphas discussed when they weren't busy making her life miserable. She'd almost reached the servants' entrance when the screaming started. High-pitched, terrified. A child's scream. Serene's head snapped toward the sound. The northern tree line, where the woods grew thick and the pack's territory met the wild lands. Another scream. Cut short this time, which was worse. No one moved. The wolves in the courtyard had frozen, their nostrils flaring, their eyes going wide with a fear that made no sense until Seren caught the scent too. Rogue. Not just any rogue. The smell was wrong. corrupted, like death and madness woven together into something that shouldn't exist. A feral wolf, one who'd lost themselves so completely to their beast that nothing human remained. "Someone get the alpha," a guard barked. "Don't engage. Rogues this far gone will kill anything that—" But Seren was already running. She didn't think, didn't calculate. The sound of that child's scream had bypassed every survival instinct she'd developed over 23 years of being prey and ignited something deeper, something that felt like fire in a body that had always been cold. The tree line swallowed her. Branches clawed at her face and arms. She ran toward the growling, toward the small whimpers she could barely hear beneath it, and burst into a clearing just in time to see the rogue. It was massive, twice the size of a normal shifted wolf, its fur matted with blood and filth, its eyes completely white. Foam dripped from jaws that could crush her skull like an eggshell. And beneath those jaws, pressed against a fallen log with nowhere left to run, was a cub. Maybe 4 years old. Brown curls, tear-streaked face. Too young to shift. Too scared to scream anymore. The rogue lunged. Seren didn't have claws, didn't have fangs, didn't have the wolf that should have risen to protect her. She had nothing but her body, and a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. She threw herself in front of the cub. The impact was like being hit by a falling tree. She felt ribs crack, felt claws rake across her shoulder and down her back. Pain exploded through her in white-hot waves, but she wrapped herself around the child and rolled, taking them both out of the immediate path of those snapping jaws. "Run!" she gasped at the cub. "The trees! Climb!" The child scrambled away, sobbing. Good. Good. The rogue turned its attention fully to Seren now. She could see the hunger in those white eyes, the complete absence of anything but appetite. This creature had been a person once, a wolf with thoughts and feelings and maybe even a family. Now it was just a mouth that wanted to feed. It lunged again. And something inside Seren, something that had been sleeping her entire life, woke up. She didn't understand what happened next. One moment she was bracing for death, arms raised in a futile shield. The next, heat poured out of her palms like liquid fire. Not flames, something else. Something golden and blinding that hit the rogue mid-leap and sent it crashing backward with a sound like thunder. The creature convulsed, whined, and then went still. Seren stared at her hands, at the fading glow that shouldn't exist. Hollows didn't have power. Hollows didn't have anything. But she'd just killed a feral rogue with light that had come from her own body. Interesting. The voice came from behind her, cold, measured, utterly devoid of surprise. Seren spun around, one arm pressed against her bleeding ribs, and found herself staring at a wall of black-clad soldiers. Royal Guard. She recognized the insignia, the silver thorns of the Ithran crown, and in front of them stood a man who could only be their king. Calyx Thorn was tall. That was her first coherent thought through the haze of pain. Tall and broad and carved from something harder than flesh. His hair was dark, almost black, falling past his shoulders in a way that should have looked soft but didn't. His eyes were gray. Not warm gray, not storm gray. The gray of old iron, of tombs, of things that had stopped feeling centuries ago. He was beautiful, the way a blade was beautiful, the way winter was beautiful when it killed you slowly. And he was looking at her, like she was a puzzle he had been waiting his whole life to solve. "You are here," Seren heard herself say. Her voice came out cracked, broken. "You were here the whole time. You could have stopped it." Calyx tilted his head slightly. "Yes." The cub could have died. But she didn't. I could have died. But you didn't. He took one step forward. His scent hit her then, pine and frost and something metallic beneath. something that smelled like old pain. You did something far more interesting instead. Seren's vision was starting to blur at the edges, blood loss, shock. The golden power had retreated back into whatever hidden place it lived, leaving her with nothing but a broken body and too many questions. What? What are you talking about? Calyx Thorn, Alpha King of Ithran, looked down at her with those tomb-gray eyes and said the last words she expected to hear. I'm talking about taking you with me. The world tilted. Seren felt herself falling. The last thing she heard before darkness swallowed her was his voice, quiet and cold and absolutely certain. Don't let her die. She's exactly what I've been looking for. Seren woke to the smell of herbs and the sound of hushed arguing. She kept her eyes closed, an old survival instinct. Assess first, react second. The voices were unfamiliar. A woman with a crisp, impatient tone and a man whose rumble felt like distant thunder. She's a hollow, Your Majesty. Dusk Hollow's records are clear. Born without a wolf, marked as... I know what she's marked as. That voice she recognized. Cold iron wrapped in velvet. The king. I also know what I saw. What you think you saw. The stress of nearly being killed can produce strange phenomena. Perhaps. Ronan? A single word, but it carried enough weight to silence whatever argument was coming. I watched a wolfless girl burn a feral rogue from the inside out with power that hasn't been seen in 400 years. I did not imagine it. Silence. Then the woman spoke again, softer now. If she's what you think she is, the old laws still apply. She would need to be... I'm aware of the old laws. I'm also aware that she's currently bleeding onto my linens and neither of you are doing anything useful about it. Footsteps retreated. A door clicked shut. Seren waited 5 heartbeats, then cracked her eyes open. She was in a bed. A real bed, not the straw pallet she'd slept on for 8 years. The sheets were white. The room was larger than the entire servants' quarters she'd shared with 11 other wolves. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating walls of pale stone and furniture that probably cost more than her life. You can stop pretending now. She flinched. The king stood by the window, silhouetted against the light. She hadn't heard him stay behind, hadn't sensed him at all, which should have been impossible. Alpha's radiated presence like a fire radiated heat. But he felt like nothing. A void where a person should be. How do you do that? The words escaped before she could stop them. Calyx turned. In the daylight, he looked less like a statue and more like a man, though only barely. There were shadows under his eyes. A tightness around his mouth that spoke of pain held very carefully in check. Do what? Disappear. Your presence. I can't feel it at all. She struggled to sit up, wincing as her ribs protested. Bandaged, she realized. Someone had cleaned and wrapped her wounds while she was unconscious. Every alpha I've ever met fills a room just by standing in it. You feel nothing. Something flickered in his gray eyes, gone before she could name it. Perhaps I've had practice at being nothing. He moved toward her, each step measured, controlled. The healers say you'll live. The rogue's claws didn't hit anything vital. You were fortunate. I was stupid. Yes. No hesitation, no softening. Incredibly stupid. You had no weapon, no wolf, no chance of survival. You ran toward a feral rogue with nothing but your bare hands. He stopped at the foot of her bed, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't read. Why? Seren thought of the cub's face, the terror in those small eyes, the way her scream had cut off mid-breath, because no one else was moving. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Calyx studied her for a long moment. She forced herself to meet his gaze, even though every instinct screamed at her to look away, to submit, to make herself small and unthreatening the way she'd learned to do around powerful wolves. but something about nearly dying had burned away her ability to cower. "The power you used," he said finally. "What do you know about it?" "Nothing." Seren shook her head. "I didn't even know I had it. I'm a hollow. We don't have power. We don't have anything. And yet." He reached into his coat and withdrew something small, a pendant on a chain, the metal tarnished with age. He held it up, and Seren saw the symbol etched into its surface, a sun rising from cupped hands. "Do you know what this is?" "No." "It's the mark of the Solwyn, a bloodline that died out 4 centuries ago." His voice remained flat, factual. "They weren't shifters. They were something older. Something that came before wolves claimed these lands. Their power was light itself, healing, purifying, and burning away corruption." He paused. "The histories say the last Solwyn was killed during the Rogue Wars. Every text, every record, every scholar agrees. The bloodline is extinct." Seren's heart was pounding too fast. "I don't understand what this has to do with me." "Don't you?" Calyx pocketed the pendant. "You're not a hollow, Seren Vale. You never were. You're something far rarer. Something your pack was too ignorant to recognize, and something I have been searching for since I took the throne." The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. "Searching for... why?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That isn't your concern. What is your concern is the choice I'm about to offer you." "Choice?" "I'm taking you to Ithran. You'll live in the palace, under my protection. You'll receive training for your abilities from the best scholars in the kingdom. You'll want for nothing: food, shelter, safety, comfort. All of it yours." It sounded like a dream. It sounded too good to be real. "In exchange for what?" Calyx's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them. A weight settling, a door closing. "In exchange, you will belong to me." Seren's breath caught. Belong. Not as a slave, not as a possession, as a ward of the crown, bound by contract and witnessed by the realm. My protection, my resources, my name shielding you from anyone who would try to take you or use you. He paused. "And there will be many who try, once word spreads about what you are. And what do you get? Your power, when I need it, for purposes I am not yet prepared to explain." Seren stared at him. This cold, empty king who had watched her nearly die and called it interesting, who spoke of ancient bloodlines and binding contracts with the same inflection he might use to discuss the weather. "You still haven't told me why you didn't help," she said quietly. "In the clearing, you could have killed that rogue with a thought. Why did you just stand there?" Something crossed his face. Pain? Guilt? It vanished too quickly to be sure. "Because I couldn't." Couldn't or wouldn't. Does the distinction matter? Yes. For the first time, the king looked away. His hands, she noticed, had curled into fists at his sides. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "There are things about me, Seren Vial, that you are not ready to know. Things that would make you run from this room and never look back. Contract or no contract." He turned back to her, and his eyes were colder than ever. But beneath the cold, she caught a glimpse of something drowning. "Accept my offer, or refuse it. But do not ask me questions I cannot answer. Not yet." The warning hung between them like a blade. Seren thought of Dusk Hollow, of her father's disgust, of her sister's pretended ignorance, of the laughter and the cruelty and the slow suffocation of being nothing to everyone who should have loved her. Then she thought of the cub's face when Seren had told her to run, the way those small arms had clung to her afterward, trusting her completely despite everything. "If I refuse," she said slowly, "what happens to me?" "You return to your pack. Word of what you did will spread. Other alphas, other kingdoms, other powers will come looking." Some will want to use you. Some will want to destroy you before you can be used against them. His voice held no judgment, no persuasion, just facts laid bare. Without protection, you will be dead or enslaved within the year. And with your protection, you will be alive, you will be trained, you will be safe. But I'll belong to you. Yes. Seren closed her eyes. She could still feel the ghost of that golden power humming somewhere deep inside her. The thing that had woken up when she'd thrown herself between death and innocence. It didn't feel like nothing. It felt like everything she'd ever been told she was missing. She opened her eyes. I accept. Something flickered in Calix's expression. Not quite surprise, not quite relief. Something in between. Then it's done. He turned toward the door. We leave for Ithran at dawn. Rest while you can. Your Majesty. He paused but didn't turn. The power I have, the Solwyn bloodline. If it's really what you say it is? She hesitated. Why do you need it? What are you preparing for? His shoulders tensed. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. I'm preparing, he said quietly, to not die. Then he was gone. Seren lay back against the pillows, her mind racing. A king who couldn't fight. Power she didn't understand. A bloodline that was supposed to be extinct. And beneath it all, a question that wouldn't stop gnawing at her. What had made the most powerful alpha in 5 kingdoms so certain that death was coming for him? The journey to Ithran took 3 days. Seren spent most of it in a covered carriage with velvet seats and curtained windows, alone except for the occasional check-in from a stern-faced healer named Orin. The king rode at the front of the procession with his royal guard, close enough for her to sometimes catch his scent on the wind. That strange combination of pine and frost and buried pain, but never close enough to speak. She told herself she was grateful for the distance. She needed time to think, to process, to figure out what she'd agreed to and why her chest ached every time she remembered the look in his eyes when he'd said, I'm preparing to not die. On the 3rd day, the carriage crested a hill, and Seren pushed aside the curtain to see Ithran for the first time. She forgot how to breathe. The city spread across a vast valley like something from a fever dream. White stone buildings climbed the hillsides and terraces, connected by bridges and staircases and gardens that bloomed in impossible colors. At the center, rising from a plateau of black rock, stood the palace, a fortress of silver and shadow that seemed to drink in the light. First time seeing the capital? Seren jumped. Orin had appeared beside the carriage, walking alongside it with the easy grace of someone who'd made this journey many times. It's a lot. Wait until you see the inside. The healer's tone was dry but not unkind. The king doesn't believe in moderation. Seren glanced toward the front of the procession. He doesn't seem to believe in much of anything. Orin followed her gaze. Something complicated crossed the healer's weathered face. His Majesty believes in more than he shows. That's part of his problem. Before Seren could ask what that meant, the carriage lurched forward, beginning the descent into the valley. The streets of Ithran were crowded with wolves, who stopped and stared as the royal procession passed. Seren caught whispers floating through the curtains, fragments of curiosity and speculation. Who's in the carriage? Another foreign dignitary? I heard it was a prisoner, some criminal from the borderlands. No, I heard it was a woman. A hollow, can you imagine? Serene's fingers tightened in her lap. Of course the rumors had already spread. Of course they knew what she was. 3 days wasn't long enough for word to travel this far unless someone had sent it ahead deliberately. She thought of the king's warning. Other alphas, other kingdoms, other powers will come looking. Had he spread the rumors himself? Was she bait for some trap she didn't understand? The carriage stopped. The door opened, and Seren found herself staring at a set of stone steps that seemed to climb forever. leading up to the palace gates. "Can you walk?" Oren asked. Seren tested her weight. Her ribs still ached, but the worst of the pain had faded over the past 3 days. Whatever medicine Oren had been giving her, it worked fast. "I can walk." She stepped out of the carriage and into the cold mountain air. The crowd had gathered at the base of the steps, nobles in fine clothes, merchants with curious eyes, common wolves craning their necks to see. She could feel their stares like physical pressure against her skin. Hollow. Broken. Nothing. The whispers were the same as Dusk Hollow. The judgment was the same. She was still an aberration. Still wrong. Still... Lady Seren. The king's voice cut through her spiral. She looked up to find him standing at the top of the steps, silhouetted against the palace gates. He'd changed during the journey, no longer wearing the black traveling clothes but formal attire of silver and gray that made his pale eyes look almost luminous. He extended one hand toward her. The crowd went silent. Seren stared at that hand. Alphas didn't offer hands to hollows. Kings didn't offer hands to anyone. The gesture was a statement, a declaration, a line drawn in front of every watching eye. She is under my protection. She has my favor. Touch her and face my wrath. She climbed the steps on trembling legs. Each step felt like a mile. The silence pressed against her from all sides, heavy with shock and confusion. When she reached the top, she took his hand. His skin was cold. Not cool. Cold. Like he'd been standing in snow. She'd noticed it before, that first day in the clearing, but now the wrongness of it struck her more sharply. Wolves ran hot. Alphas especially. This temperature wasn't natural, but his grip was steady as he turned to face the crowd, her hand still clasped in his. "This is Seren Vile," he announced. His voice carried without effort, filling the courtyard like thunder. "She is my ward, bound by crown contract, protected by my name. Any insult to her is an insult to me. Any threat against her is a threat against Ithran." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Seren caught fragments. Ward? But she's a hollow. The king's ward. What could he possibly want with... "She will be presented formally at the equinox celebration," Calyx continued. "Until then, she is not to be disturbed." He released her hand and turned toward the gates without waiting for response or acknowledgement. Seren had no choice but to follow, her heart hammering so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. The palace swallowed them. The noise of the crowd faded as massive doors swung shut behind them, and suddenly Seren was standing in a hall of white stone and silver fixtures, so beautiful it made her chest hurt. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. Calyx didn't slow down. "Do what?" "Announce me like that. Take my hand in front of everyone. You could have just brought me in through a back entrance, kept me hidden." "I could have." He turned a corner, leading her deeper into the labyrinth of hallways. "But then, you would have been a secret. And secrets in this palace have a way of being discovered under the worst possible circumstances. So instead you made me a target. I made you mine." He stopped abruptly, and Seren nearly walked into his back. When he turned to face her, his expression was unreadable as always. But there was something in his eyes. Something that might have been approval. "There's a difference." She held his gaze. "I'm not sure I understand the difference yet." "You will." He resumed walking. Seren followed, her mind churning. They climbed a spiraling staircase, passed through a gallery of portraits. Old kings and queens staring down with painted eyes, and finally stopped before a door of dark wood carved with intricate patterns. "Your chambers," Calyx said. "Everything you need should be inside. If it isn't, tell Oren and it will be provided." "My chambers." Seren stared at the door. "I thought wards usually stayed in the servants' quarters." "Wards of minor nobles stay in servants' quarters." He pushed the door open, revealing a room that made the carriage look like a shed. A canopied bed draped in blue silk. Windows overlooking the valley. A fireplace already crackling with warmth. Wards of the crown, stay where I put them. Seren stepped inside, turning in a slow circle, trying to absorb it all. This is too much, she heard herself say. I don't deserve. You don't know what you deserve. His voice was quiet behind her. You've spent your entire life being told you were nothing. That's a hard thing to unlearn. She turned to face him. He stood in the doorway, not entering, as if the threshold were a line he couldn't cross. How do you know that? She asked. How do you know anything about what my life was like? For a moment, just a moment, the mask slipped. She saw something raw beneath the cold, something that looked almost like recognition. Because, he said softly, I know what it feels like to be told you're a monster until you start believing it. Then the mask was back, and he was turning away. The equinox celebration is in 1 week, he said over his shoulder. You'll be presented to the court. I suggest you rest and prepare. Your Majesty. He paused. In the courtyard. When you took my hand. She hesitated, then pushed forward. You were cold. Freezing cold. And earlier you said you couldn't help me in the clearing. Not that you wouldn't. His shoulders tensed. Is that part of it? She pressed. Part of whatever you're not ready to tell me? The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Yes, he said finally. It's all part of the same thing. And when will you tell me what that thing is? He turned his head slightly. In the torchlight, she could see the sharp edge of his profile, the tension in his jaw. When I trust you enough to show you what I really am. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. And when I'm certain the truth won't make you run. He left without another word. Seren stood alone in her beautiful room, surrounded by luxury she'd never dreamed of, belonging to a king she didn't understand, bound by a contract she'd signed without reading. But beneath the fear and the confusion and the exhaustion, something else flickered to life. Curiosity. She'd spent her whole life being invisible, being nothing, being a ghost that everyone looked through. For the first time, someone was looking directly at her, and what he saw had made him offer her an entire kingdom's protection. She moved to the window and stared out at the city below, at the palace walls, at the mountains beyond, already dusted with early snow. I know what it feels like to be told you're a monster until you start believing it. The cold king of Ithran had looked at her like she was valuable, important, worth protecting. But he'd also looked at her like he was drowning, and she was the only thing keeping his head above water. Seren touched the glass, feeling the chill seep into her fingertips. What kind of monster, she wondered, needs a hollow to save him? The week passed in a blur of preparations Seren didn't fully understand. Tailors arrived with fabrics she couldn't name, silks that shifted color in the light, velvets so soft they felt like water against her skin. They measured her and muttered to each other in the rapid dialect of the capital, occasionally glancing at her with expressions caught between curiosity and disbelief. The hollow, their eyes said. The king's strange new ward. Oren came each morning to check her wounds, which were healing faster than they should have. When Seren mentioned this, the healer simply raised an eyebrow. Solwyn blood accelerates healing. Yours especially, it seems. The histories say the strongest of them could mend bones in hours. I'm not strong, Seren said automatically. I'm a hollow. Oren snorted. You killed a feral rogue with light that poured from your bare hands. Whatever you are, girl, hollow, isn't it? The king didn't visit. Seren told herself she wasn't disappointed. She told herself the weight in her chest when days passed without seeing him was just anxiety about the upcoming celebration. Just nerves about being presented to a court full of wolves who would judge her, mock her, see her as less than nothing. She almost believed it. On the 7th day, the morning of the equinox, a servant arrived with a gown that made Seren's breath catch. It was the color of dawn, pale gold fading to rise at the hem, embroidered with tiny crystals that caught the light like captured stars. When she put it on, the fabric moved around her like a living thing, and for the first time in her life, she looked in a mirror and didn't see a ghost. She saw someone who might actually belong in a palace. "His Majesty requests your presence in the Great Hall." The servant bowed. "The presentation begins at sunset." Seren's stomach twisted. "I'll be there." The Great Hall of Ithran was larger than the entire town center of Dusk Hollow. Massive columns rose toward a ceiling painted with constellations, and thousands of candles floated in the air. Actual floating candles, held aloft by magic Seren didn't understand. Wolves in formal attire filled the space, their combined scents creating a dizzying tapestry of power and politics. Every single one of them turned to stare as Seren entered. The whispers started immediately. "That's her? The Hollow? She doesn't look like much. Why would the king waste a crown contract on—" "I heard she has some kind of power. Light magic, supposedly." "Impossible. Hollows don't have magic, everyone knows that." Seren kept walking. The path to the raised dais at the front of the hall seemed to stretch forever, each step taking her deeper into enemy territory. Because that's what this was. A room full of wolves who saw her as an intruder, an aberration, and a mistake their king had inexplicably decided to protect. Calyx sat on the throne at the center of the dais. He wore black tonight, stark against the silver throne, stark against his pale skin, stark against everything. His eyes found hers the moment she entered, and something in her chest unclenched slightly. "He's watching. He sees me." She climbed the steps to the dais and stopped before the throne, unsure of the protocol. Should she bow? Kneel? She'd never been presented at court before. She'd never been presented anywhere. "Kneel," someone hissed from the crowd. A woman's voice, dripping with contempt. "Even a hollow should know to kneel before her betters." Heat flooded Seren's face. She started to lower herself. "No." The word cracked through the hall like a whip. Calyx rose from his throne in one fluid motion, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Lady Seren is my ward," he said. His voice carried to every corner, flat and cold and absolutely final. "She kneels to no one in this hall. Not to the nobility, not to the council, not even to me." Stunned silence. Seren stared at him. He'd just elevated her above every wolf in the room, above himself even. It was unheard of. It was impossible. "What are you doing?" she wanted to ask. "Why would you—" Furthermore, Calyx descended the dais steps until he stood directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the faint shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw, close enough that his cold scent wrapped around her like a winter cloak. "Anyone who addresses Lady Seren with disrespect will answer to me personally. This is not a request. It is not a suggestion. It is law." He turned to face the crowd, and his next words were softer but somehow more dangerous. "I trust I've made myself clear." No one dared respond. Calyx turned back to Seren and extended his hand, just as he had on the palace steps a week ago. But this time, when she took it, he didn't just hold her hand. He raised it to his lips. The kiss was feather light. His mouth was cold against her knuckles, cold as frost, cold as everything about him. But the gesture itself burned through her like wildfire. Kings didn't kiss the hands of their wards. Kings didn't kiss the hands of anyone but equals. And he'd just done it in front of every wolf who mattered in Ithran. "Your Majesty," she breathed. "What are you—" "Trust me," he murmured, too low for anyone else to hear. "Just for tonight, trust me." She nodded, not trusting her voice. He led her to a seat beside his throne, not below it, beside it, and the celebration began. The hours blurred together. Dancing, music, wine that Seren didn't drink because she needed her wits about her. Wolves approached to introduce themselves, their politeness paper-thin over their curiosity and resentment. She smiled, nodded, said the right things, felt the king's presence beside her like a shield against everything that wanted to tear her apart. It was nearly midnight when someone finally made a move. "Your Majesty." A tall wolf approached the dais, his dark hair streaked with silver, his posture radiating barely contained aggression. "I must speak with you about this arrangement." "Lord Vesrin?" Calix's voice was bored. "What a pleasure. The council has concerns." Vesrin's lip curled as his gaze flicked to Seren. "Taking a hollow as a ward is unprecedented. Some might say it's an insult to the noble houses who have offered their own daughters. Some might say many things." Calix cut him off lazily. "I find I rarely care. With respect, Your Majesty, the bloodlines of Ithran deserve—" "Lord Vesrin." The boredom vanished. In its place was something arctic, something that made every wolf within earshot take an unconscious step backward. "My ward has more power in her smallest finger than your entire bloodline has produced in 6 generations. She killed a feral rogue with her bare hands while your precious noble daughters fainted at the sight of blood. Do not speak to me of what the bloodlines deserve." Vesrin's face went purple with rage. "You dare?" "I dare everything." Calix rose from his throne, and despite being nearly the same height as Vesrin, he somehow seemed to tower over the man. "I am your king. I dare whatever I choose. And I choose her." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning Seren didn't fully understand. Vesrin's eyes blazed. For a moment she thought he might actually challenge the king directly. But then his gaze dropped, submission forced through gritted teeth. "As you say, Your Majesty." He retreated into the crowd, but not before shooting Seren a look of pure, undiluted hatred. "I've made an enemy tonight," she realized. A powerful one. But when she glanced at Calix, at the king who had just defended her honor in front of his entire court, she found she didn't care. Because for the first time in her life, someone had chosen her. And that meant more than any enemy ever could. Training began the next morning. Seren had expected dusty libraries and ancient texts. Instead, she found herself standing in an underground chamber beneath the palace, surrounded by walls of black stone that seemed to absorb light itself. "This room was built 4 centuries ago," Oren explained, adjusting something on a complicated metal apparatus in the corner. "Specifically for Solwyn training. The stone is obsidian. It contains power surges, prevents accidents from reaching the rest of the palace." "Accidents?" "Solwyn light can level buildings if it's not controlled." The healer's tone was matter-of-fact. "The histories record at least 3 instances of untrained Solwyn destroying entire villages by mistake." Seren stared at her hands. "That's comforting." "It wasn't meant to be comforting. It was meant to be motivation." Oren gestured toward the center of the room. "Now, let's see what you can do." The first week was humiliating. Seren couldn't summon even a flicker of the golden light that had poured from her hands in the clearing. She concentrated until her head throbbed. She thought about the rogue, about the cub, about every moment of terror and desperation she'd felt. Nothing worked. "You're trying too hard," Oren said after the 5th failed attempt. "The power responded to instinct, not intention. You need to find what triggers it." "Nearly dying triggered it." "Then perhaps we need to nearly kill you again." Seren couldn't tell if the healer was joking. The king observed some of the training sessions, standing in the shadows at the edge of the chamber, never speaking, never interfering. His presence made everything harder. She found herself hyper-aware of him, of his cold scent, of his pale eyes tracking her movements, of the questions she still hadn't found the courage to ask. Why did you watch without moving? Why do you feel like ice? What are you preparing to not die from? On the 10th day, something changed. Seren was alone in the training chamber, Oren having been called away for an emergency in the city. She'd been practicing breathing exercises, trying to find the calm center that supposedly existed inside every soulwin. When the door opened, Calyx entered, alone. Your Majesty. She scrambled to her feet. I didn't expect. Oren says you're struggling. The bluntness stung more than she'd expected. I'm trying. The power just won't. Show me. She blinked. What? Show me what you've been doing. Show me where you're stuck. Seren hesitated, then raised her hands, palms up, and concentrated. Reached for that golden warmth she'd felt in the clearing. Searched for the fire that had burned inside her when she'd thrown herself between death and innocence. Nothing. She let her hands drop. See? It's like it's not even there anymore, like I imagined the whole thing. You didn't imagine it. Calyx moved closer, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop with each step. I watched you burn corruption out of a creature that had slaughtered 15 wolves before you arrived. That wasn't imagination. Then why can't I do it again? He stopped directly in front of her. Close. Closer than he'd ever stood before. She could see the individual threads of silver in his gray eyes, the faint lines of tension around his mouth. Because you're reaching for the wrong thing, he said quietly. You're trying to find fear, desperation, the memory of almost dying. That's what triggered it before. No. He shook his head slowly. Fear was the catalyst, but it wasn't the source. Think, Seren. What were you actually feeling in that moment? Not what was happening to you. What were you feeling about the cub? She closed her eyes. Tried to remember. The clearing. The rogue. The small, terrified face of a child with nowhere to run. I wanted to protect her, she said slowly. I wanted her to live. She trailed off. What? I wanted her to know that someone cared. Her voice cracked. That she wasn't alone. That even if I couldn't save her, at least she wouldn't die thinking no one tried. When she opened her eyes, her palms were glowing. Faint at first, then brighter. Golden light pooled in her cupped hands like liquid sun, warm and alive and pulsing in time with her heartbeat. There, Calyx breathed. That's it. Seren stared at the light, tears pricking her eyes. I don't understand. How is this? Soulwind power isn't rooted in fear or anger or desperation. It's rooted in connection, in the desire to protect, to heal, to ensure that no one is left alone in the dark. His voice had dropped to barely a whisper. That's why your bloodline was so rare. That level of empathy can't be taught. It can only be born. The light flickered, steadied, grew stronger. I feel it now, Seren said wonderingly. It's been there the whole time. I just didn't know how to listen. Most people don't. Calyx reached out, and for a moment she thought he was going to touch the light. Instead, his fingers brushed the back of her wrist, the barest contact, cold against her warm skin. The light flared, not dimmed, flared, as if his touch had amplified something rather than suppressed it. They both froze. What was that? Seren breathed. Calyx pulled his hand back sharply. His expression had shuttered, all trace of openness vanishing behind the familiar mask of ice. Nothing. A resonance effect. It happens sometimes with compatible power signatures. Compatible? He stepped back. Your training is progressing well. Continue working with Oren. I'll check on your progress in a few days. Your Majesty. But he was already gone, the door swinging shut behind him, leaving Seren alone with her glowing hands and 1,000 new questions. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the way her light had reacted to his touch, The way his coldness had seemed to ease, just for a moment, when the golden glow had brightened between them. The way he'd looked at her in that instant before he shut down, like a man who'd seen something impossible. Something he wanted desperately but didn't dare hope for. She got out of bed and walked to the window. The moon was full tonight, casting silver light across the mountains. Beautiful. Peaceful. And then she heard it. A sound from somewhere deep in the palace, low and anguished, barely human. Surin didn't think. She grabbed a robe, slipped out of her chambers and followed the sound through corridors she barely knew, down staircases that seemed to descend forever. Until she reached a door of black iron at the end of a torchlit hallway. The sound was coming from behind it. She should go back, should pretend she'd heard nothing, should remember that she was a ward with no right to intrude on the king's secrets. Instead, she pushed the door open. The room beyond was vast and cold, lit by a single fireplace that seemed to produce no warmth. And on the floor in front of that fireplace, curled in on himself like a wounded animal, was Calyx. His skin was blue. Frost crawled across his arms, his chest and his face. His breath came in ragged gasps that fogged the air, and his eyes, when they found hers, were wild with pain. "Get out," he managed through chattering teeth. "Don't look." But Seren was already moving. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands finding his frozen cheeks, and the golden light that had been sleeping inside her roared to life without any effort at all. "Don't," Calyx gasped. "Seren, you don't understand what this is." "I understand you're freezing." Her hands pressed against his face, pouring warmth into skin that felt like ice sculpture. "I understand you're in pain. Everything else can wait. It will drain you. The cold is too deep, Then it drains me." She didn't waver. "I'm not leaving." Something in his expression cracked, a wall crumbling, a fortress surrendering. He stopped fighting. The cold was immense. Seren felt it pushing back against her light like a living thing, hungry and ancient and determined to devour everything warm in its path. Her power had never faced anything like this, a darkness so profound it seemed to swallow hope itself. But she thought of the cub in the clearing, of the terrified child who'd clung to her afterward, of every moment in her life when she'd felt alone and wished desperately that someone, anyone, would notice her suffering. "I'm here," she thought fiercely. "You're not alone. I won't let you be alone." The light burned brighter. The frost began to retreat. It took hours, or maybe minutes. Time lost meaning in that room, with the firelight flickering and the cold retreating inch by inch under the onslaught of her power. At some point, Calyx's hand found hers, his fingers wrapping around her wrist, still cold, but warming. Holding on like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. When it was finally over, they sat together on the cold stone floor, both trembling, both exhausted. "Every night?" Seren asked quietly. Calyx didn't answer at first. His head was bowed, his dark hair falling forward to hide his face. She waited. "Not every night." His voice was raw. "Only when it spreads too far. Only when I can't push it back on my own." "What is it?" The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "A curse," he said finally, "placed on my bloodline 3 centuries ago by a dying queen who thought my ancestor had wronged her." She was right. He had wronged her. But the punishment she chose. He laughed bitterly. "The kings of Ithran are condemned to freeze from within. Slowly, progressively. Each generation dies younger than the last." Seren's chest tightened. "The coldness, the way you couldn't fight the rogue. It's all—" "Yes. The curse prevents us from using our wolf strength, our alpha abilities. It drains our heat, our power, everything that makes us what we are." He raised his head, and his eyes were hollow. My father died at 42, his father at 50, his father at 60. I'm 31 years old, Seren. On my current path, I have perhaps a decade left. Probably less. The words hit her like a physical blow. Less. That's why you were looking for a Solwyn, she whispered. Light magic. The opposite of ice. You thought. I hoped. He corrected gently. I searched every record, every legend, every scrap of ancient text. The Solwyn bloodline was the only counter ever mentioned. Fire would burn us alive. Earth and water have no effect. But light? He looked at her hands, still faintly glowing. Light purifies. Light heals. Light was the only thing that might push back the cold. And tonight? Did it work? For now. He flexed his fingers, examining them as if seeing them for the first time. The curse is still there. I can feel it waiting. But the ice that was climbing toward my heart. He placed his hand on his chest. It's retreated. Further than it's ever gone before. Hope and horror warred in Seren's heart. Hope because she could help him. Horror because helping him meant this would happen again. And again. And again. Until... You're thinking about the long term, Kalix said quietly. Don't. I didn't bring you here to be my eternal nursemaid. I brought you here because I needed time. Time for what? To find a permanent cure. He pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. Seren rose with him, her hand catching his elbow to steady him. The Solwyn histories speak of a ritual, a way to break any curse rooted in elemental magic. But the texts are scattered across a dozen kingdoms, hidden in libraries and vaults that haven't been opened in centuries. You're searching for them. I've been searching for 5 years. He met her eyes. I found one fragment 2 years ago, another 6 months after that. Each piece brings me closer to understanding, but time is running out. Seren thought about this, about the cold king who had watched her nearly die and done nothing, not because he didn't care, but because he literally couldn't help. About the man who had raised her hand to his lips in front of his entire court, declaring her worth in front of wolves who wanted her destroyed. About the way his touch had made her power flare brighter instead of dimmer. Let me help, she said, his brow furrowed. You are helping. You're training, not just training, the research, the ritual, whatever you're looking for. She stepped closer. You said the Solwyn power responds to the desire to protect. Well, I want to protect you. I want to help you break this curse, not just hold it back. Break it. Permanently. Something raw flickered across his face. Why would you want that? I took you from your home. I bound you with a contract you didn't fully understand. I've given you every reason to hate me. You took me from a place that called me hollow and treated me like a ghost. You gave me a name, a purpose, a room that doesn't leak when it rains. She almost laughed. You're the first person in my entire life who looked at me and saw something worth protecting. Why wouldn't I want to return that? Kalix stared at her. And then, so quietly she almost didn't hear it, he said, You're not what I expected. Neither are you. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but closer than anything she'd seen from him before. You should rest, he said. Tonight took more from you than you realize. The exhaustion will hit soon. He was right. She could already feel it, a bone-deep weariness creeping through her limbs. But she didn't want to leave. Not yet. Will you be all right? For tonight, yes. He hesitated, then added, Thank you, Seren, for not running when you saw. I've never been good at running away from things. No. Something warm flickered in his gray eyes. I'm beginning to understand that. She left him there, walking back through the maze of corridors to her chamber on legs that felt like they were filled with sand, But even as exhaustion dragged her towards sleep, her mind wouldn't stop racing. The curse is killing him. My power can hold it back. But holding back isn't enough. He needs a cure. She thought about the way he'd looked at her when the frost retreated. The raw hope he'd tried so hard to hide. The way his hand had gripped hers like she was the only thing standing between him and an early grave. Because she was. And for the first time since she'd arrived in Ithran, Seren understood exactly why the Alpha King had chosen a hollow girl from a nothing pack on the edge of his kingdom. She was the only one who could save him. The question was, would saving him be enough? Or would she lose him anyway, the way she'd lost everyone else who'd ever mattered? I won't let that happen, she promised herself, as sleep finally claimed her. Whatever it takes. However long it takes. I'll find a way to break this curse. I won't let him freeze. The weeks stretched into months, and everything changed. Seren trained daily, pushing her power further than she'd imagined possible. She learned to summon light at will, to shape it into shields and weapons, to pour healing warmth into wounds both physical and magical. Orin declared her a prodigy. The court whispered that the king's strange ward might be something more than anyone had guessed. But the real change happened in the quiet hours. Every night, after the palace slept, Seren made her way to Calix's private study, where they pored over ancient texts together by candlelight. He showed her the fragments he'd collected, pieces of the ritual scattered across faded scrolls and crumbling books. She helped him translate languages she'd never heard of, guided by instinct more than knowledge, as if some part of her recognized the words from a past life. They talked about more than research. He told her about his father's death, how he'd watched the old king freeze solid in his throne room, unable to move or speak, his eyes still open as the ice consumed him. She told him about her mother, who died when Seren was 6, the only person in Dusk Hollow who'd ever looked at her with love. He confessed that he'd never expected to live past 30. She confessed that she'd never expected anyone to notice if she died. I would notice, he said quietly. I would notice if you were gone. Seren looked up from the text she'd been reading. Calix was watching her with an expression she couldn't name. Something between wonder and terror and a desperate, aching hope. Your Majesty, Calix. His voice was rough. When we're alone, I want you to call me by my name. Calix. She tested it on her tongue. It felt dangerous. It felt right. I would notice too, if you were gone. The candle flickered between them. Neither of them moved. This is dangerous, he said. What's happening between us? You understand that? Yes. The curse feeds on emotion, on connection. The closer I get to anyone, the faster it spreads. He laughed bitterly. That's the cruelest part. The dying queen didn't just curse us to freeze, she cursed us to die alone. Seren reached across the table and took his hand. His skin was cool, but not frozen. Not tonight. You're not alone, she said. You'll never be alone again. Something shattered in his expression. Seren, I know you can't love me. The words came out steadier than she felt. I know the terms of our contract. I know what you warned me about. But I need you to know that I don't. His grip tightened on her hand. Please, don't say it. Why not? Because if you say it, I'll say it back. His voice cracked. And if I say it back, the curse will take what's left of me. She stared at him, at the fear in his eyes, at the wanting. The curse activates when you love someone? When I admit it. He laughed again, hollow and broken. I've been falling for you since the moment you threw yourself in front of that rogue. But as long as I don't say the words, as long as I hold it inside, the curse can't claim it. The confession hung between them like a held breath. Serene's heart was pounding so hard she could barely think. He loved her. The cold king, the man who was supposed to want nothing from her, loved her. And that love was killing him. Then I won't say it either, she whispered. We'll be careful. We'll. It's too late for careful. Calix stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I've spent months telling myself I could keep you at a distance, that I could use your power without losing myself. But every time you walk into a room, the ice retreats. Every time you touch me, I feel warm for the first time since I was a child. He turned to face her, and his eyes were blazing. You're already inside my heart, Seren. The only question is whether I'm strong enough to keep the curse from using you to destroy me. She rose and crossed to him, slowly, giving him every chance to pull away. He didn't. Then let's find the cure faster, she said. Let's break this curse before it breaks you. And if we can't, we will. She placed her hand on his chest, directly over his heart. I didn't survive 23 years of being nothing just to lose you now. Calix closed his eyes, leaned into her touch. For one perfect moment they stood there together, two broken people holding each other up. Then his eyes snapped open. Something's wrong. Seren felt it too, a sudden cold radiating from beneath her palm. Not the gradual chill of his curse, something sharp, something aggressive, something that was spreading fast. Calix. He grabbed her hand, yanking it away from his chest. But she'd already seen. Frost was climbing up his neck, crawling across his jaw, and unlike every other time, her light wasn't stopping it. No. She reached for him again. No, this can't. I said the words. His voice was strangled. Not out loud, but in my heart. Just now. I admitted what I feel for you and the curse. He collapsed. Seren screamed his name, dropped to her knees beside him, poured every ounce of power she possessed into his frozen body. It wasn't enough. The ice kept spreading. And somewhere deep inside her, Seren understood with horrifying clarity. Loving her was going to kill him. Unless she found another way. The next hours were a waking nightmare. Seren poured everything she had into fighting the curse. Every drop of light. Every ounce of warmth. Every desperate prayer to gods she'd never believed in. The golden glow from her hands was so bright it hurt to look at, filling the study with blinding radiance. But the ice kept spreading. There has to be something else, she gasped, her power flickering as exhaustion clawed at her. The texts, the ritual fragments. There has to be. Seren. Oren's voice came from the doorway. The healer had arrived sometime in the chaos, summoned by servants who'd heard her screams. You need to stop. You'll kill yourself. I don't care. He would care. Oren moved closer, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. Look at him. Really look. Seren forced herself to focus through the blur of tears and exhaustion. Calix lay on the floor where he'd fallen, frost covering half his body, his breathing shallow but steady. The ice had stopped spreading. Your light is holding it back, Oren said quietly. But you're right. It's not reversing. Something's different about this attack. Something's amplifying the curse. Amplifying? Serene's mind raced. That's not possible. Curses don't just get stronger on their own. No. Oren's expression was grim. They don't. They moved Calix to his chambers, where a fire roared constantly and the bed was piled with furs. Seren refused to leave his side, her hand clasped around his frozen fingers, maintaining a steady flow of warmth that kept the ice at bay. But she couldn't keep this up forever. Already her vision was blurring at the edges, her body screaming for rest. Tell me about the curse, she demanded. Everything you know, everything the histories say. Oren settled into a chair beside the bed. The dying queen who cast it was named Morvain. She was a powerful witch. Not a wolf, but something older. Your king's ancestor had promised to marry her, then abandoned her for a political alliance with another kingdom. So she cursed his bloodline to freeze. To freeze from within. to lose everything that made them strong, to die alone, unable to love, unable to be loved. Oren's voice was heavy. But the histories always troubled me. Curses this powerful require anchors, sources of continued power. They don't sustain themselves for 3 centuries without help. Seren's head snapped up. You think someone's been maintaining it? I think someone's been feeding it. The healer met her eyes. And I think whoever it is just gave it a massive boost. The pieces clicked together in Seren's exhausted mind. The curse had been manageable for years. Calyx had found ways to push it back, to slow its progression. But ever since she'd arrived, someone knows, she breathed. Someone knows I'm helping him and they're fighting back. That would be my guess. Seren thought about the court, about the wolves who'd stared at her with barely concealed hostility, about one wolf in particular, whose hatred had been so sharp it had cut through even her numbness. Lord Vesrin, the council member who challenged Calyx at the equinox celebration, she said slowly. He was furious about my presence, furious about the king protecting me. Vesrin. Oren's expression darkened. His family has served on the royal council for generations. They've always been close to the throne. Close enough to know about the curse? Close enough to know everything. Seren looked down at Calyx's frozen face, at the man who had chosen her, protected her, loved her despite knowing it would destroy him. I need to get into the archives, she said. The restricted ones. The ones that hold the real histories, not the sanitized versions they teach in schools. Those archives are sealed by royal decree. Only the king can... Then I'll unseal them. Serene's voice was hard. I'm his ward. I speak with his authority while he's incapacitated, and I'm not going to sit here and watch him die while the answer might be locked in some dusty vault. Oren studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, the healer nodded. I'll take you there. The restricted archives were buried deep beneath the palace, accessible only through a series of locked doors and winding staircases. Seren's light provided illumination as they descended, casting dancing shadows on walls that hadn't seen visitors in decades. The final door required 3 keys, one held by the king, one by the head archivist, and one by the senior council member. Oren had the king's key, retrieved from Calyx's study. The archivist, a nervous wolf named Petra, had been roused from bed and convinced to cooperate. But the 3rd key... Lord Vesrin holds the council key, Petra said apologetically. He's held it for 15 years, ever since his father passed it to him on his deathbed. Of course he does. Is there another way in? Seren asked. No. The vault was designed to be impenetrable. Even the king can't access it alone. Seren stared at the massive door. 3 keyholes, gleaming faintly in the light from her palms. Behind it, potentially, was the information she needed to save Calyx's life, and the one person who could help her get inside was the same person who might be killing him. Then we ask Vesrin, she said. Oren grabbed her arm. That's madness. If he's really behind the curse's amplification, then he'll refuse, and we'll know for certain. Seren's jaw set. And if he's not, we get inside and find our answers. Either way, we learn something. She didn't wait for agreement. She turned and walked back up the stairs, her light blazing brighter with every step. Lord Vesrin's estate sat on the edge of the noble quarter, a sprawling mansion of dark stone and iron gates. Seren arrived at dawn, exhausted but determined, with Oren trailing reluctantly behind her. The guards at the gate tried to turn her away. She pushed past them with a burst of light that sent them stumbling. Lady Seren. Vesrin appeared at the top of the entrance stairs, still dressed in his nightclothes, his silver-streaked hair disheveled. This is highly inappropriate. The hour alone. The king is dying. She climbed the stairs until she stood directly in front of him. I need your key to the restricted archives. Now. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise? Fear? Satisfaction? I'm sorry to hear about His Majesty's condition, Vesrin said smoothly. But the archives are sealed for good reason. The knowledge contained within could save his life. Seren stepped closer. Unless that's exactly what you're trying to prevent. The mask slipped. Just for a moment. But a moment was enough. She saw it. The cold calculation behind his concerned expression. The hatred that had nothing to do with her being a hollow, and everything to do with what she represented. You've been feeding the curse, she said quietly. All these years. Your family has been keeping it alive. Vesrin's face went white, then red, then settled into something hard and ugly. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? She raised her glowing palms. I'm a Solwyn, Lord Vesrin. My bloodline was created to fight exactly this kind of corruption, and I can feel it on you. The residue of dark magic, the stain of something ancient and hungry. Impossible. The Solwyn are extinct. Clearly not. She took another step forward and he took one back. Tell me why. Tell me why your family has spent 3 centuries torturing the kings of Ithran, and maybe I won't burn the truth out of you. For a long moment, Vesrin said nothing. His eyes darted toward the guards, toward Orin, toward every possible escape route. Then his shoulders slumped. Morvain was my ancestor, he said flatly, the witch who cast the original curse. She didn't just want the kings to suffer, she wanted to ensure her bloodline would always have power over them, so she bound the curse to her descendants. As long as one of us lives and feeds it, the curse can never be broken. You've been killing them, Seren breathed, generation after generation. You've been murdering kings and calling it fate. I've been maintaining balance. His voice turned sharp. The kings of Ithran are tyrants, monsters. They destroyed my ancestor and countless others like her. The curse is justice. Justice? Rage unlike anything Seren had ever felt surged through her. Calyx has never hurt anyone. He's spent his entire life trying to protect his people, trying to be better than his ancestors. He's one of them, Vesrin spat. That's enough. Seren's light flared so bright that Vesrin cried out, shielding his eyes. Give me the key, she said, and tell me how to break the curse completely. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't. The curse is tied to my bloodline. As long as a descendant of Morvain lives, then I'll find another way. She stepped forward, her power coiling around her like living flame. The key. Now. Vesrin's hand trembled as he reached into his robe and produced a tarnished iron key. He threw it at her feet. It won't matter, he hissed. The curse has already taken root too deep. Even your precious light can't save him now. Seren picked up the key. Watch me. The restricted archives held secrets that had been buried for centuries. Seren tore through the shelves, guided by instinct and desperation, until she found what she was looking for. A crumbling journal bound in leather so old it practically disintegrated in her hands. Morvain's own writing. She read through the night, Orin translating the passages she couldn't understand, piecing together the truth of the curse and the ritual that might break it. Here. Seren's finger stabbed at a page near the end. She wrote about a failsafe, a way to break the curse if her descendants ever abandon their duty. Orin leaned closer. What does it say? The curse is anchored in ice and sustained by blood, but it can be severed by its opposite. Light, freely given, channeled through a bond of true sacrifice. Seren looked up, her heart pounding. The Solwyn were the only ones who could break it. That's why they were hunted to extinction. And the bond of true sacrifice? Seren thought about Calyx, about the love he'd confessed without words, about her own feelings, burning inside her chest like a second sun. I know what it means, she said quietly. I know what I have to do. She just wasn't sure she'd survive doing it. The ritual chamber was prepared within hours. Servants worked through the day, following Seren's instructions without question. Whether because of her authority as the king's ward or the desperate determination in her eyes, she didn't know, didn't care. Calix was carried in on a stretcher, his body now almost entirely encased in frost. Only his face remained visible, pale and still, like a death mask carved from snow. His breathing was so shallow she had to press her ear to his lips to confirm he was still alive. "You need to understand the risk," Oren said, as Seren took her position at the center of the ritual circle. The journal was clear. A bond of true sacrifice means giving something essential, something you can't get back. "I understand. If this fails, you could die. You could lose your power forever. You could—" "I understand." Seren met the healer's eyes. "And I'm doing it anyway." Candles had been arranged in precise patterns around the room, their flames burning gold instead of orange, infused with her power over the past several hours. Symbols drawn from Morvaine's journal covered the floor in chalk, forming a web of ancient magic that hummed with potential. At the center of it all lay Calix, and beside him stood Seren, her hands already glowing. "The curse is anchored in ice," she murmured, reciting the words she'd memorized. "It feeds on isolation, on coldness, on the absence of connection. But light burns away darkness. And love." She placed her palms on his frozen chest. "Oh, love melts even the deepest ice." The power surged out of her like a dam breaking. It wasn't like the gentle healing she'd practiced for months. This was everything. Every drop of light in her body, every spark of warmth in her soul, every ounce of the love she'd been forbidden to speak. She poured it all into him, holding nothing back, giving everything she had and everything she was. The room exploded with golden radiance. Seren screamed as the curse fought back. She could feel it now. The ancient hatred woven into Morvaine's magic. The generations of feeding and nurturing that had made it strong. It clawed at her power, trying to devour her light the way it had devoured the warmth of every king before Calix. But she didn't stop. She thought about the clearing, about throwing herself in front of a rogue to save a child she'd never met, about the moment she'd realized she was capable of something more than being hollow. She thought about Calix watching without moving, not because he didn't care, but because he literally couldn't help, about the self-loathing that must have consumed him, about the loneliness of knowing your own heart was your enemy. She thought about every night they'd spent together in his study, poring over ancient texts, sharing pieces of themselves they'd never shown anyone else, about the way he looked at her like she was sunrise after endless winter, about the love he'd confessed in his heart but couldn't speak aloud. "I'm speaking it for both of us," she thought fiercely. "I love you. I love you. I love you." The curse shattered. Not gradually, not piece by piece. It exploded outward in a wave of black ice that dissolved into nothing the moment it touched her light. 3 centuries of accumulated hatred, 3 centuries of sustained malice, unmade in a single instant of pure, sacrificial love. Seren collapsed. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Calix's eyes opening, gray and clear and warm for the first time since she'd known him. She woke to sunlight and the smell of flowers. For a long moment she simply lay there, cataloging sensations. Soft sheets beneath her. Warmth surrounding her. A weight on the bed beside her that felt familiar and safe. "You're awake." Seren turned her head. Calix sat in a chair beside the bed, but he'd pulled it so close that his hand rested on the mattress near her pillow. His face was pale, but it was the pallor of exhaustion, not frost. His eyes were the gray of storm clouds, not tombs. And when he smiled, she felt it in her chest like a second heartbeat. "You saved me," he said quietly. "Someone had to." Her voice came out as a croak. "You were doing a terrible job of saving yourself." He laughed. Actually laughed, a sound she'd never heard from him before, warm and rough and real. It made her want to cry. The curse? She managed. Broken. Completely. Oren has run every test she knows. He took her hand and his skin was warm. Warm. Whatever you did, it didn't just push the ice back. It burned out the anchor entirely. The curse is gone. Not just for me, but for my entire bloodline. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Good. That's good. Seren. His voice cracked. You almost died. You gave so much of yourself that your heart stopped for nearly a minute. If Oren hadn't been there, I'd do it again. She squeezed his hand. 1,000 times. I'd do it every day for the rest of my life if that's what it took. He stared at her. And then, slowly, he leaned forward and pressed his forehead to hers. I love you, he whispered. I can say it now. The curse is gone, and I can finally... His voice broke. I love you, Seren. I've loved you since you threw yourself in front of that rogue. Since you looked at me with those fierce eyes and demanded to know why I hadn't helped. Since you walked into my life and refused to be invisible. I love you too. The words felt like freedom. I love you, Calyx, the cold king who turned out to be the warmest person I've ever known. He kissed her. Not on the hand, not on the forehead. On the mouth, soft and warm and tasting of tears and joy, and 3 centuries of loneliness finally ending. When they broke apart, both of them were crying. What happens now? Seren asked. Now? Calyx smiled, a real smile, unreserved and brilliant. Now we live, together, for as long as we're given. The weeks that followed brought changes Seren never could have imagined. Lord Vesrin was arrested, tried, and executed for treason. Not just for maintaining the curse, but for the murders of every king who had died from its effects over 3 centuries. You didn't just break the curse, you burned out the anchor entirely, Oren reported. And with Vesrin gone, there's no one left who could ever feed it again. It's over. Truly over. Seren thought about Vesrin's final words. That the curse was justice for ancient wrongs. Maybe it had been once. But justice that punished innocent descendants for the sins of their ancestors wasn't justice at all. It was just more pain, passed down through generations like a disease. Calyx issued a royal proclamation abolishing the classification of hollow throughout Ithran. Wolves who couldn't shift, who had been marked as broken and worthless, would now be tested for alternative gifts. Soulwind bloodlines, elemental magic, abilities that had been overlooked because no one had bothered to look. You're not the only one, he told Seren. The archivists have found records of other hollows throughout history who manifested unexpected powers. We just never recognized what we were seeing. How many? She asked. Enough to start an academy. He smiled. If you're willing to teach. An academy. A place where children like her, children who'd been told they were nothing, could discover what they really were, could find out that being different didn't mean being broken. Yes, she said. I'm willing. The wedding was held on the first day of spring. Seren walked down the aisle of the great cathedral in a gown of white and gold, light literally glowing from her skin as she passed. The pews were packed with wolves from every corner of Ithran. Nobles who had once sneered at her, common folk who had whispered about the Hollow Queen, foreign dignitaries who had traveled weeks to witness the impossible. The Alpha King marrying a former Hollow, the Cold King, finally warm. Calyx waited for her at the altar, dressed in silver and gray, his eyes never leaving her face. He looked younger than she'd ever seen him, as if the curse's destruction had lifted not just ice, but years. When she reached him, he took both her hands in his. You know, he murmured, too low for anyone else to hear. You could have had an easier life, a normal life, if you'd just run when you had the chance. Normal is overrated. She smiled up at him. I'd rather have you. The ceremony was traditional in some ways, revolutionary in others. When the priest asked if anyone objected, silence held, not the grudging silence of fear, but the genuine silence of acceptance. The court had seen what Seren was capable of. They'd watched her face down a centuries-old curse with nothing but her own light. They'd learned, painfully, that the woman they'd dismissed as hollow was anything but. "I claim you as mine," Calix said, his voice carrying through the cathedral. "My wife, my queen, my mate, my heart, freely given, forever yours." "I claim you as mine," Seren replied. "My husband, my king, my mate, my light, freely given, forever yours." When they kissed, the cathedral erupted in golden radiance, her power responding to her joy, flooding the space with warmth that made even the most cynical nobles gasp. For the first time in 3 centuries, an alpha king of Ithran had claimed his mate without fear. For the first time in her life, Seren Vial knew what it meant to belong. 1 year later, Seren stood in the courtyard of the Solwyn Academy, watching a class of young students practice summoning their light. "Keep your focus on connection," she called out. "Remember, the power comes from empathy, from the desire to protect." A small girl at the edge of the group raised her hand. "Queen Seren, is it true you killed a rogue with your bare hands before you even knew what you were?" Seren smiled. "It's true." "Weren't you scared?" "Terrified." She crouched down to the girl's level. "But being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the right thing anyway. Like you did. Like anyone can do. Even you." The girl beamed and returned to her practice, her small palms flickering with faint golden light. Footsteps approached from behind. Seren didn't need to turn around to know who it was. She could feel him through the bond that hummed between them now, warm and constant as sunlight. "The council meeting ran long," Calix said, sliding his arms around her waist. "Something about trade negotiations with the Eastern Kingdoms." "Sounds tedious." "Incredibly." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "But I kept thinking about coming home to you, and somehow that made it bearable." Seren leaned back against his chest, watching her students practice. In the distance, she could see the palace rising against the mountains, no longer a fortress of cold isolation, but a home filled with warmth and laughter and light. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked quietly. "If you hadn't come to that clearing, if you hadn't watched." "I think about it every day." His arms tightened around her. "I watched you throw yourself between death and innocence, and I couldn't do a single thing to help. It was the worst moment of my life. And now?" "Now?" He turned her to face him, cupping her cheeks in hands that were warm. Always warm now, like a fever finally broken. "Now I watch you save people every day. I watch you teach children that being different is a gift, not a curse. I watch you love our kingdom with everything you are." His thumb traced over her cheekbone, catching a tear she hadn't realized she'd shed. "I spent my whole life believing I was doomed to freeze alone," he said softly. "And then you came, burning so bright I couldn't look away. You didn't just melt the ice, Seren. You taught me what it means to be alive." We taught each other. She rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and sweet. "We saved each other." "Yes." He smiled against her lips. "We did." That night, after the academy had closed and the palace had quieted, Seren stood at their bedroom window, looking out at the stars. She thought about the mating auction where it had all begun, not hers, but the thousands of others across the kingdoms where wolves were bought and sold like cattle. Tomorrow, Calix would sign a proclamation abolishing the practice throughout Ithran. Other kingdoms were already following their lead. She thought about the little girl who had asked if she was scared, about all the children at the academy who were discovering their gifts instead of their limitations, about the future they were building, one small light at a time. She thought about her father, who had called her hollow and treated her like a ghost. who had died last winter in the Dusk Hollow pack, alone and unmourned, while his worthless daughter ruled a kingdom. She thought about her sister, who had written to her 3 months ago, tentative, ashamed, and desperate to reconnect with the sibling she'd pretended not to know. Seren hadn't responded yet, but she would, eventually, when the wounds had healed enough to bear touching. Arms wrapped around her from behind. Warm breath stirred her hair. "Come to bed," Calyx murmured. "You're thinking too loud." "Sorry." She turned in his embrace. "I was just remembering." "Remembering what?" "Everything." She smiled. "How scared I was. How alone. How certain I was that I would never matter to anyone." He pressed his forehead to hers. "And now?" Serene thought about the question. About the girl who had stood at the edge of a clearing, facing a monster with nothing but her bare hands and a desperate need to protect something innocent. About the woman she'd become, a queen, a teacher, a wife, a light in the darkness. "Now," she said, "I know better." They went to bed together, wrapped in warmth and love and the quiet certainty of a future they'd fought for and won. Outside, the stars wheeled through their ancient patterns, indifferent to the struggles of the small creatures below. But Seren didn't need the stars to guide her anymore. She had her own light now, and she would never let it go out.